When I bought the house on Magnolia Court, I knew the neighborhood had a homeowners association. What I did not know was that I'd become the unlikely centerpiece of a story that would bring our entire community closer together. My name is Daniel Ferris, and near 3 years ago, I bought a modest 2-story home in Briar Hollow, a subdivision known for its tree-lined streets and meticulously kept lawns. I truly loved everything about the place. The wraparound porch, the original hardwood floors, and the small garden out back where I planned to grow tomatoes and herbs, just like my grandmother used to. The HOA board, led by a well-meaning, overly cautious woman named Carol Whitfield, sent out a notice one spring morning claiming my home had an unauthorized exterior modification that violated community guidelines. The notice mentioned a utility disconnection request had been filed with the local power cooperative, citing repeated unaddressed violations. I was stunned, since I had not modified anything. My porch railing was original to the house. My mailbox matched the approved community style, and I had even submitted paint samples for board approval before repainting my shutters the previous fall. Rather than panic, I treated this as an opportunity to learn how our community actually operated. I requested copies of the HOA's records, including the violation history, inspection reports, and meeting minutes. As a financial analyst, I'm comfortable digging through paperwork, and what I found told a far different story than the one in that notice. It turned out the violation had been filed against a different address, 1410 Magnolia Court, not my home at 1401. A simple transposition error in the property management software had mixed up 2 house numbers. The neighboring property, which had been vacant for several months while the previous owners settled an estate, had an unpermitted shed addition that genuinely needed review. My home, ironically, was one of the most compliant properties on the street. Instead of escalating the situation with anger, I scheduled a meeting with Carol and the property management company. I brought my documentation, photos of my home dated against the violation notice, my original paint approval email, and a printed copy of the county's address records showing the clear distinction between the 2 properties. Carol was mortified. She explained that the management company handling enforcement had recently switched software systems and addresses had been imported incorrectly during migration. She apologized sincerely and promised the board would implement a manual verification step before any disconnection requests were filed in the future. What could have become a tense dispute turned into something much more valuable. The board invited me to join a newly formed Communications and Accuracy Committee, designed to review notices before they went out, and to give homeowners a clearer process for resolving disputes. I accepted, partly out of curiosity, and partly because I wanted to make sure no other neighbor experienced the same confusion. Over the following months, I got to know my neighbors in a way I never expected. The committee meetings, originally just a handful of concerned residents, became a place where people shared stories about their homes, their renovation projects, and their hopes for the neighborhood. We started a community newsletter, complete with a homeowner spotlight section celebrating thoughtful renovations and long-term residents. One of those spotlights featured the Alvarez family at 1410, the address that had been mistakenly flagged in the first place. After inheriting the home from their grandmother, they had been slowly restoring it, including building that shed I mentioned earlier, which turned out to be a workshop for Mr. Alvarez's woodworking hobby. Once the permit paperwork was properly filed, the board approved the structure without issue, and Mr. Alvarez even built a beautiful cedar bench for the community park as a thank you gesture. As the months passed, I found myself more invested in Briar Hollow than I ever imagined. I started attending the quarterly garden walks, where residents opened their backyards to share gardening tips and seasonal produce. My tomato plants, once a small personal project, became part of a community swap table where neighbors traded vegetables, jam, and baked goods every Saturday morning. Carol and I became unlikely friends. She later told me that the experience taught her how important it was to listen first and verify before acting, a lesson she said reshaped how she approached her role as board president. The HOA implemented a new policy requiring 2 independent confirmations of an address before any notice involving utility services could be sent, a policy that other associations in the Stries region eventually adopted as a best practice after Carol presented it at a regional housing talk conference. By the following spring, our neighborhood had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. The annual block party, once a sparsely attended afternoon gathering, grew into a full weekend event featuring a farmer's market, live acoustic music from a teenage neighbor learning guitar, and a friendly chili cook-off that the Alvarez family won 2 years running. I also used the experience as a turning point in my own life. The patience and clarity I practiced while resolving the mix-up reminded me how much I enjoyed organizing information and helping people find solutions. I eventually left my analyst position to start a small consulting business helping homeowners associations modernize their record-keeping systems, ensuring other communities wouldn't face the same kind of confusion mine had. The business grew steadily, fueled largely by word of mouth from satisfied HOA boards, who appreciated a system built around accuracy and homeowner trust rather than rigid enforcement. Within 2 years, I had clients across 3 states, and Briar Hollow remained my flagship example of how a community could turn a misunderstanding into meaningful improvement. Looking back, I sometimes laugh at how dramatic that initial notice felt. A disconnection warning over a violation that didn't exist, tied to a house number that wasn't even mine. But that moment of confusion led me down a path I never expected. Deeper friendships, a thriving small business, and a genuine sense of belonging in a neighborhood I now consider home in every sense of the word. These days, when new homeowners move into Briar Hollow, I make it a point to welcome them personally. I tell them about the garden swap, the block party, and yes, even the story of the mixed-up address that started it all. It's become something of a community legend, a reminder that even small clerical errors can become the spark for real connection if everyone approaches the situation with patience, curiosity, and a willingness to listen. My grandmother always said, a house becomes a home not because of its walls, but because of the people who care about it. Standing on my porch most evenings, watching neighbors wave as they walk dogs or push strollers down the street, I think she would be proud of how far this small mix-up carried us, and how a single misdirected notice became the foundation for a stronger, more connected community than any of us imagined. Word of the mix-up eventually reached a local newspaper columnist who wrote a short feature about community resilience, interviewing Carol, the Alvarez family, and me. Readers from nearby subdivisions reached out, curious how we turned a stressful situation into something positive, and several HOA boards invited me to speak at their meetings. I remember standing in a packed community room in a neighboring county, sharing slides about address verification, and realizing how much I had grown. Skills that once felt tedious in my old finance job had become the foundation of something I was genuinely proud of. Carol and I stayed close collaborators after she stepped down from the board. She joined my company part-time, helping smaller associations improve their record-keeping, often sharing her own story as a hopeful example. She liked telling clients that the best HOA boards admit mistakes quickly and make things right. Meanwhile, life on Magnolia Court kept evolving in small, wonderful ways. The Alvarez family expanded their workshop into a modest side business, crafting custom garden furniture for neighbors throughout the subdivision. Their cedar benches became a familiar sight at the community park, each slightly different, each a quiet symbol of how the neighborhood had healed from that early misunderstanding. I planted a second garden bed the following year, and then a third, turning my backyard into a small, thriving space that supplied much of the produce for our Saturday swap table. Neighbors began calling it Daniel's Patch, a nickname I never expected, but grew to love. Children from down the street would stop by to help water the tomatoes, often leaving with fresh basil or homemade salsa. Every spring, the HOA newsletter features a small section called Lessons Learned, a tradition Carol started after our experience, highlighting one story each quarter to help homeowners feel informed rather than anxious. It has become one of the most read parts of the newsletter, proof that transparency builds lasting trust within a community. Looking back, from the confusing notice on my door to the thriving consulting business it inspired, I see the experience as proof that frustrating moments can become turning points, when we choose curiosity over conflict. Briar Hollow taught me that homeownership is never just about a house. It is about the people who surround it, the mistakes that bring them together, and the steady work of building something worth protecting.